In the last 10 years, we've turned Israel into a world power. As long as I'm Prime Minister, Iran will not have nuclear weapons.
You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today here on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com, where we are only 6 days away from the election that could decide Israel's future or not, could just lead us into another election. It's become less of a big deal when we're voting 3 times in a year. It is what it is. There's absolutely no guarantee at this point that we won't be going to a 4th, 5th, and 27th election. Anything can happen. And I had the privilege on Thursday of having an interview with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, for the Jerusalem Post. I strongly encourage you to read the article in print at jpost.com. We do have an audio recording here that I did of the interview now, and I needed to have it ready for Friday's newspaper, and this recording was done over the phone, this interview. Here we have an interview with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you for your time.
Hi.
What would be worse for Israel, a minority government or a 4th election?
Both of them are very bad options, and then both will happen if people don't go out and vote for Likud. Benny Gantz can't form a government without relying on the vote of Ahmed Tibi, Ayman Uda, and the joint Arab list in the Knesset. The numbers are just not there. At most, he has, with Meretz, Peretz, and Lieberman, 50 to 52 seats. So one of two things will happen. Either there'll be a 4th election. If we don't get in, there'll be either a 4th election. If Likud doesn't win, there'll be either a 4th election or a government that a left government headed by Gantz and dependent on Ahmed Tibi and the joint list. And the only possible out is to vote for the Likud for a strong right-wing government that will protect and advance Israel's interests.
You've been saying that you need to remain in office in order to implement President Trump's plan. Does he as well? And if no government is formed and we go to 4th election, will you apply sovereignty in order to do it before the American election?
I think once the Trump plan has been put forward, the goalposts have been moved, and I think it'll be very difficult for any administration to put them back. Obviously, I intend to carry out this plan as soon as the mapping process is complete. That will not take that long. It'll happen if I'm elected. Obviously, equally obvious, if Gantz is elected and forms a government, if Gantz forms a government with Ahmed Tibi, Ahmed Tibi has already told him, if you plan to apply Israeli law to the Jordan Valley or anywhere else, you won't be prime minister. You'll be the leader of the opposition. That means that the only way that the Trump plan will be implemented is if I'm elected. And voters should ask themselves, who do you trust to implement that plan? Benny Gantz or me? I think the answer is obvious.
Yair Lapid told the Post that if a Democrat wins and you remain prime minister, Israel will be in trouble. Are you concerned about what the Democrats have said about you? For instance, Sanders calling you a racist?
Well, I think Yair Lapid's assessments of the American political scene leave a lot to be desired. He said that I was ruining the relationship with America. And since then, we have the U.S. administration pulling out of the disastrous Iran deal that Lapid and Gantz supported, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, moving the American embassy there, recognizing our sovereignty in the Golan Heights, recognizing the legitimacy of Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria, and afterwards passing the historic Trump plan that changes the whole ground rules. Again, I don't think the goalposts will move back, and I think that any administration, Democratic or Republican, will have to work by the new realities, which take into account the situation as it really is on the ground. You can't advance peace on falsehoods, and any attempt to advance a U.S. plan that is based on falsehoods will crash on the rocks of political realities. That's what's happened again and again and again. And I'm sure that the next administration administration, whatever it will be, will have to consider the fact that there's a new plan out there. Anyway, I'll work fine with either Democrats or Republicans.
Even Bernie Sanders?
Look, I don't want to get into specific names, but I can tell you that I meet with every single American congressman or senator or congresswoman that comes here, be they Democratic or Republican, and the relationship is excellent. We value the bipartisan relationship with the United States. It's a cornerstone of our policy. That will continue.
If you or President Trump do not remain in office, how will the security situation change? Would Iran get nuclear weapons?
I think the reason Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons today is because for a very long time, I carried the torch against a nuclear Iran, both in actions that were directed by the Mossad under my government and political actions that I led in opposing the dangerous Iran deal and advocating very tough sanctions against Iran. I'm glad President Trump has agreed with this policy and obviously carried it to a singular new level. But I think that if there's an Israeli government that is weak on Iran, as Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid have been, then obviously we'll be in trouble. As long as I'm Prime Minister, Iran will not have nuclear weapons.
Is there any chance, after all the administration did for Israel, that Jonathan Pollard can be coming home before the election, ideally?
Look, we put in a request. I think that it's a very good thing that he has been let out of prison. That's important. In New York, obviously, we would like to see him repatriated in Israel, and we're working on it. But I can't speak for the administration. It has done many, many things for Israel, and I hope that this will happen as well. But there are legal procedures that take place in the United States. Obviously, they require time.
What would your administration, if you form another government, do to help English-speaking immigrants to this country who read our newspaper and will be coming maybe to your event on Sunday?
Look, it's a question of how long newspapers will last in any language. But as far as English speakers, my connection with them is obvious. I spent my high school years in the United States as well as my years in the university. I have enormous respect for the American contribution to Israel's security and to humanity as a whole. I mean, the idea of free markets, individual rights, balance of the checks and balances in government, these are all enormously important ideas that America brought to the world. It's also clear that without the preeminence of the United States, 20th century, our whole history would have looked, globally, our whole history would have looked different. So now the contribution of English speakers from the United States and other English-speaking countries to Israel is also enormous because they bring these values that are so important to our future to Israel. And what can we do? We can make it a free, liberal country where people are free to speak their minds, to initiate enterprise, and to have a plurality of opinions. We still have a way to go, especially on the third point, because our press is deeply concentrated and deeply hostile to the ideas that I just put forward. Most of our press.
I have a lot of friends that want to vote Likud, believe in you and your policies, and even agree that the cases against you are frivolous, but are worried that you wouldn't be able to handle being prime minister and a defendant at the same time. What do you tell them to reassure them?
I tell them that what I do in 1 hour, my opponents don't do in a year or ever, because they either lack the political orientation or the experience or the ability. I've proven what we've done in the last 10 years. We've turned Israel into a world power. We're ranked as the 8th power in the world by respected research firms. That didn't happen by itself. It happened because I put in the time. In the last 3 years, when I've been hounded by this absurd witch hunt, I've brought unbelievable achievements to Israel. What I can do in an hour, they can't do, period. So instead of working 16-hour days, I'll work 15-hour days. days, I'll be able to do it. Not a question.
Your threats to Hamas have gotten more intense. What can you do that hasn't already been done before to ease the plight of the people down there in the south?
I think we understand, I personally understand the difficulties they face. It's primarily the psychological difficulties, especially of youngsters who hear these red alerts or the occasional rocketing or the balloons. These, while they haven't claimed lives, nearly any lives, it's still harrowing and difficult to live under those circumstances. Therefore, we passed on a message to Hamas. You saw what we did to you when you tried to cross the fence. Over 300 Hamas terrorists tried to cross the fence and attack our people and soldiers died. You saw that. You also saw what we did to Islamic Jihad leader who was killed in his bed, who tried to upset the calm. And 25 terrorists were killed along with him. But if you think that we'll tolerate this continuing harassment of our people, then the answer is you're wrong. And in fact, they will pay in ways that they haven't anticipated and were planning. I just don't reveal what those plans are, but anybody sitting in the cabinet, in the security cabinet, knows very well that this is serious. I think Hamas has to choose. They either take concrete actions against the people who dispatch those balloons against us, or we'll take this action against them. We'll do it. I don't do it lightly, because going to a serious military operation or war is not something I do lightly. But if I have to, I will.
Do you have any message to the people about the coronavirus? What happens if we get on the eve of the election and people start panicking if there's a victim all of a sudden in Israel?
I think it's quite miraculous that we haven't had it so far. And the reason that has not happened here is because we've adopted a policy that says that it's better to take extra precautions than fewer precautions. And in fact, even though people are complaining about that, we've created a very tight entrance policy into Israel, which is a small country that I think we've been able to regulate in the most effective way in the world. Right now, Israel has not experienced any cases so far, but of course, we'll do whatever we can to prevent this from happening or delay it as far as possible. I think the people of Israel should know that there's a firm hand, that we're using all the government agencies and private industry to thwart the spread of the disease or reduce it when it happens. And so far we've been successful. We'll continue to do what's necessary. And nobody knows the extent of the virus. Nobody knows if we face a cyclical disease cycle or a pandemic. What I don't want to happen is to have an infodemic where people throw themselves into a panic because they don't have somebody in charge, but they do. And in fact, I don't think any country in the world is better organized to address this challenge than Israel.
Do you want to say something to the world about your decision today to build in Har Choma? They're already starting to condemn us for building in our capital.
What's new? What's new is that we have, Har Choma. When I was first elected, I decided on building Har Choma. It was a barren hill. Today, there are about 40,000 people who live there. It's like a small town in Israel. It's just one community in Jerusalem. Now we're going to add another 10,000 people there and another 4,000 units in nearby Givat HaMatos, 1,000 of which will go to expanding the neighborhood of Bet Safafa for the Arab residents there, 3,000 for additional homes for Jewish residents, with hotels, with industry, you name it. They've been complaining all the time. They've been condemning us all the time. But we build, if the building of Jerusalem and Israel as a whole, for that matter, depended on the approval of our neighbors, and we wouldn't have Israel.
Avigdor Lieberman's behavior has been very strange. Is there any way of bringing him back?
He's made his decisions. He openly says that he's going to support Gantz, who will build a government, who will create a government that's dependent on Ahmed Tibi and the joint list. So people should know that when they vote for Lieberman, they vote for a government dependent on Ahmed Tibi. Why he's doing that, well, you should ask. You should ask what his motivations are, because it clearly doesn't make political sense. So there must be another motivation.
Today he said that your political career is over. You're going to try to show him?
I'm not going to try to show him. I'm trying to do what's best for the country.
Today, Benny Gantz, he said Jewish majority without active support is what he's trying to get, without active support of the joint list.
In other words, what he wants to do is to get somebody to defect from the right-wing bloc, so he has more. He's not going to have a Jewish majority. He wants to say that he'll have more Jewish votes. That's what he wants to say, and that the Ahmed Tibi will abstain instead of vote actively. Who cares? It's the same thing. He cannot form a government without the support or abstention, which is the same thing. Of Ahmed Tibi, it's the same thing. He knows that. This is just wordsmithing around it. Gantz can't form a government without Tibi.
You surprised many by announcing that Nir Barkat would be your candidate for finance minister. What is this revolutionary plan that you've announced?
Well, I think it's a simple choice between the free market economies that I've led that have brought Israel enormous success. Rigid Histadrut economy that Gantz and Nissenkorn will bring. Nissenkorn is the head of the Histadrut. He's the designated finance minister for Blue and White. I've designated Nir Barkat, who's comes from high-tech success and a free market orientation, and there's no question how Israel will fare under either one. We've caused a revolution with the free market reforms that I brought forward, and we have 6 major, enormous reforms that we're bringing together that will reduce drastically food prices, housing prices, bring huge investments for the health system, help in small businesses, and continue to raise the difference between the periphery, the Negev and the Galilee, with the center. Equally, we'll have major investments in the leading fields of high-tech, which includes artificial intelligence, big data, connectivity. These are great blessings for the state of Israel. So the choice is really a free economy led by me and Nir Barkat, or a semi-socialist Histadrut economy led by Benny Gantz and Nissenkorn. Remember, too, that compared to our fantastic successes, Benny Gantz has had one experience in the market in a questionable company called the Fifth Dimension, which is now going to be under investigation, but which he brought to bankruptcy within a very short time. So if people want the continuation of Israel's economic miracle, then they should continue. They should support the Likud and me, because we brought this miracle with our policy, and will continue to bring miracles to Israel if we are elected. Do we need anything else? I think
we did it. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, let's see if they have any comment. I'll come back to you, okay?
Wonderful, and thank you for your time, and Avi's doing a great job.
Thank you.
That was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu here on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com with special permission from the Jerusalem Post. And we will be with you next week when I'll be very, very tired, when the votes will be in the process of being counted. Should be fun. And I encourage those of you who are in Israel, please vote. Perform your civic duty. Looking forward to talking to you next week. Bye-bye.
You're listening to the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com, broadcasting the truth and beauty of Israel to the world.